Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. That I want to start with a question. How do you feel about asking other people for help? How good are you at that? Do you sort of feel like you have to have your own back because you're not really sure that other people will? Or do you just not trust people to show up for you the way that you can and do show up for them? Well, if you're nodding your head, then you're in the right place. This video is for you, my friend. If you avoid asking other people for help because you don't want to owe anybody anything or because it feels uncomfortable to be vulnerable, what I'll be talking about in today's video is why we do this. This is called hyper-independence. Why are we like this, right? What are the causes? What are the characteristics so that you can identify whether you are hyper-independent or not? And how to think about relating to others differently, like how you can actually start with baby steps to make changes to this behavioral pattern that can create a lot of pain in our lives when we're hyper-independent, because I'm a recovering hyper-independent, so I know. So, my name is Terri Cole. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a relationship expert, and the author of Boundary Boss and the Boundary Boss Workbook, and the new book called Too Much, which is coming out October 15th. You can pre-order right now at hfcbook.com. Before we get started, if you are new to my channel, please introduce yourself in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you get notified every time we roll out new stuff, which is every Tuesday and every Thursday. And since I do it for you, I would really be bummed out if you were missing it. Why don't we move it on into the meat of today's video, shall we? I think we shall. Well, why don't we start with what is hyper-independence? Let's just start with it. Why does it even matter? Well, hyper-independence can be sometimes an extreme form of self-reliance, right? Resulting in sometimes it makes you feel isolated from other people. It can create unfulfilling relationships. And sometimes it means doing way too much for others while not really expecting reciprocity, not really expecting that to be coming back your way. So sometimes hyperindependence can be considered a trauma response, often from learning that you couldn't trust people when you were growing up. So I hate to do it, but I always have to. It seems like we're always sort of going back to the scene of the crime, as I call it, which is your childhood. But the truth is, this is where these behaviors get planted. This is where we learn this stuff. So what types of behavior with the adults in your life might contribute to being hyper-independent? Inconsistent parenting. If the adults in your life were inconsistent, if you could count on them, but then you couldn't count on them, if someone had an addiction issue, if there was abuse, right? All of these things make the grown-ups in your life untrustworthy in some way. But inconsistent parenting teaches children that they can't count on you to do what you say you're going to do. And so they feel like they have to do it themselves. Childhood neglect also creates this sense of hyperindependence. So if you were neglected in childhood and didn't have what you needed, you might be overly driven to make sure that you have everything that you need, like sort of above and beyond. It's almost like trying to undo the past. And again, not asking other people to do it, but doing it basically for yourself. Asking for and receiving help in childhood if that resulted in something bad happening to you. Either getting in trouble or someone taking advantage of you or harming you or abusing you in some way. And another thing, and I think this is the most common that I see with my crew of people and people with high-functioning codependency, is being parentified in childhood. So if you're a parentified child, what does that mean? That means, there's two ways to do it. I actually recently did a video and a podcast on it, where there's sort of two ways of being parentified. You can be emotionally parentified, where you are sort of like a confidant for your parent, or your parent spoke to you about things that were not age appropriate. It could be financial issues that the family was having. It could be the affair that they were having and wanting to talk to you about it, or they could just be talking shit about the co-parent, also inappropriate and super stressful for kids. So there's the parentification. That's one, is the emotional. The second is more structural, where you're actually doing tasks and jobs that are way beyond your years. I had a client who was 7, actually, who was cooking dinner for her 4-year-old sister. And even if it was just mac and cheese, like, what is a 7-year-old doing working a stove, right? Like, in healthy family systems, a 7-year-old isn't making dinner because that's not healthy. They're not cognitively developed enough to even, I mean, you can do it, but not really safely, which is what we're talking about. And also with hyperindependence, how the adults in your life impact you is that maybe you also saw this behavior, right? And I think that the hyperindependence that you may have displayed, if we displayed it in childhood where we were very good at taking care of ourselves and our siblings or whoever it is, that could have been a really protective thing for you. If you were the kid who could see that one of your parents was about to become violent or do something like that, explode, and maybe you were able to get the younger kids out of there or go outside and play for yourself so that you weren't being subjected to it, right? There's an adaptive aspect to why we become hyper-independent, right? It served us well in childhood, and so much of the time, of course, then you get to adulthood and these adaptive functions and behaviors become maladaptive in adulthood, right? So if we're trying to like break it up, right? What is the difference between healthy independence and hyper-independence? I would say that healthy independence says, I got this, but I will ask for help when I need it. That's healthy independence, where you feel like you can count on yourself, but you also know you can ask others. Hyper-independence is more like, I got this, and I'm not comfortable asking other people, right? It's easier for me to do it myself so I can avoid either being a burden to someone else or being disappointed by someone else. So when you think about it, in adulthood, we're trying to protect ourselves from the painful or the injuring experiences that we had in childhood. But hyper-independence doesn't actually protect us, right? It's an illusion because people will still have the power to hurt us in other ways. So let's talk about signs of hyper-independence. This was an article in Very Well Mind, which I love. It's a great website. Overachieving, overcommitment, refusing to ask for help, putting up walls in relationships, right? Again, because the vulnerability piece when you're hyper-independent is like real. It's so scary. And I remember in my own life just being so like shocked and elated that I met Vic, decades ago, where I really felt like, wow, this could be like it. Like for a woman who never wanted to get married, really, I was like, wow. But the thought of really being vulnerable to him was so effing scary. It's really felt like life and death to me. And I wanted to so badly, but I was so afraid. And I felt like it was sort of too late. I remember telling my therapist, Bev, was talking about it. And she said, well, why won't you let Vic do whatever the thing is he wanted to do for me, And I said, because I'm already in love with him. And I don't want to give him any more power to like decimate me if he turns out to not be who I think he is. She was like, wow, that's very telling. Like, why do you think he would decimate you? And I'm like, I don't know. But if he turns out to not be the kind and amazing person that he seems to be, I don't think I could take it. Like, I was so scared because I was in love. And so that sense of vulnerability, because it was a childhood fear, it really actually did feel like life or death. And a lot of times you can tell when you're having a fear, if it's a childhood fear, it'll sort of be more dramatic than the adult fear. Because with kids, everything seems like a 5-alarm fire, because we're really not in a position to be that empowered. Like when you're 7 years old, you're not like getting your own apartment. You know what I mean? So lack of trust for others, we already talked about. You might be stressed out. You might feel burnt out. Dislike neediness, right? Dislike neediness and don't want to appear weak, which is, you may not say that or think that, but really think about how it makes you feel. Pushing people away, which also, we could get into a whole thing of attachment styles around this, but we won't. But that's pushing people away is kind of avoidant if we're talking about attachment styles. Saying, I got it, I'm good. I mean, I read about this in the Too Much book about how one of the mantras, there's 2 mantras, and they both fall perfectly into what we're talking about in this episode. One is, it has to be me, that feeling that if it's going to get done and get done right, it's got to be you. And the other is, I got it. We're just the I got it girls. We just got it. And the thing is, when you're highly capable, you do got it, right? But just because you can doesn't mean you should. And this is where I'll walk you before the end of the episode. We'll walk into other things that you can do. But just because you're highly capable doesn't mean you should do all the things that you're doing, or that you should do it all on your own because you're capable. And another indication is feeling like you're better off alone, or that it's easier, or a way of, it's sort of guaranteeing that you won't get hurt, or being in a relationship and being hyper independent in that relationship where you are sort of in control of everything and not really allowing yourself to be sincerely vulnerable. I see this so much in HFCs, right? So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about overlaps with HFCs. Just high-functioning codependence, we just feel like we're the only ones who can get anything done properly. That is a setup for doing everything and doing it all by yourself, right? We're quick to learn a lot about others. We're good talkers. We're good listeners. But we're not that good about revealing stuff about ourselves in a real way. Again, I feel like maybe it's not wanting to burden other people, but when you think about what happens when you actually tell someone the truth about who you are or a struggle that you've had, it makes you vulnerable to them. So that sort of makes sense, and taking on more than our share of responsibility for things, right? Feeling overly responsible for situations and people and other people's feelings. When we think about hyperindependence itself, there is a huge cost to be this way in our relationships. So it's not free. Well, the first thing is that if we always say, I got it, when people offer help, my mother, Janie Cole, will tell you that sooner or later the offers start drying up. People just stop offering to help us if we don't ever receive it. And that really leads us to be resentful, right? It can lead to burnout too because of the amount that we're doing. There's a feeling of being unseen. When you're hyper independent, it's funny. So many times when in my 20s, I sometimes revert to it even now in my thoughts. Because listen, I'm in recovery from HFC, but it's a daily discipline to be healthy in this way. I mean, my nature is still going to be to overgive and overfeel and overlove and feel overly responsible, right? And so I don't take those actions, but you still feel it. And I sometimes can feel that martyred part of me be like nobody knows the amount of work that I do. Like nobody understands what it's like to be me. You know what I mean? That's not like my favorite thing to admit to you guys, but it's the truth. Where that's when I know, I'm like, you're being hyper independent. Why aren't you reaching out for the support that you need? Why aren't you asking for what you need? Why aren't you telling the truth about how you feel? Because, these things, it's just like going to the gym. Being in recovery from being an HFC requires us to flex this muscle every day. That loneliness or that existential crisis that can come from the hyperindependence and not being seen and not being heard, that is really real. And really, the reason why I even care about this is because I want you to have real relationships that feel great. I want you to be seen and known. Like, you're so worth knowing. Like, the real and authentic you is so worth knowing. And part of the hyperindependence as well is, you might have conflict or trouble with interpersonal relationships. Because hyperindependence means that we are hyperly controlling ourselves and doing everything on our own. But if you also identify as an HFC, you're probably covertly or overtly attempting to control a lot of other things that go on in your relationships. So that creates interpersonal strife. I mean, it really does. Obviously, with the Vic story, I eventually got over it. But it took time for me to realize, A, that he was, that was 27 years ago. So here we are, that he wasn't going anywhere, but that he also wasn't holding anything over my head, and that he was highly capable, and that he was doing what he wanted to do because he really loved me and wanted to be a part of my solution, whatever the problem was. And that's exactly the same to this day. Like, he's the best. He really is the best, the most loving. But again, I had to trust, because I had this feeling in the beginning, the first year of the relationship, I'd say, that there was a little part of me that was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was like, and listen, it's not like it was, Vic was widowed, divorced, and had 3 acting out teenage sons. So this isn't like I walked into Pleasantville, you know what I mean? Like the perfect home. But he and the boys and all of it, even though it was kind of a mess for a while, they were and are perfect for me, Like they were I found my family. And what a relief it was when I realized that he could be trusted and that I didn't have to do it all on my own by myself. I remember, and of course the universe puts you in a position to learn that in some kind of hard way, because I wasn't wanting to learn it actively. I took him to meet my sister, Kathy, and her husband, and we were visiting, and I twisted my ankle so badly that I couldn't do anything. Like, it was blown up. I had to just elevate it. So like, I couldn't control anything. You know what I mean? I couldn't be in there controlling their conversation. I couldn't pack up our stuff. I couldn't do anything. And of course, I was a basket case about it, because he was literally meeting my sister for the first time. And yet, of course, what did I learn? Well, that he was highly capable, that he was raising 3 kids by himself after his wife passed away for almost 12 years until I came. So like, he could figure out how to pack a fucking suitcase. But the relief that I experienced, and it almost felt like for the first time in my life, I was able to exhale when I had that realization. I mean, it's still such an emotional thing, because the quality of my life got so much better when I moved in that relationship from hyper-independence to healthy independence, and really, of course, then really to more interdependence, right? Where he can count on me and I can count on him too. So I really understand the pain and the fear of being vulnerable. But we can do this one step at a time. And in the guide, I'm going to give you tips. So go to terricole.com/guide of how to shift into healthier ways of relating if you identify as someone who's hyper-independent, how to slowly ask other people for help, right? Be discerning with who you trust. Start with better boundaries, right? Just small ones, right? The next time someone asks you for help, say, yes, please. Just that alone would change your life. And then also in the guide, I'm going to include some self-compassion practices, because I really do think that self-compassion and self-consideration is such an important part of us being healthy enough to know that we are flexible enough to be in relationships that are mutual, and that we don't have to control everything, or that we don't have to do it all ourselves. So I hope that if you identify with being hyper-independent, that this gave you hope, that you can change, that it can change, that you can learn new ways of relating. Make sure you have pre-ordered too much, because I covered tons of this in the book. hfcbook.com is where you pre-order, and then you come back and you put in your information, and we'll give you all the bonuses. So many exciting things happening. You guys, I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. I hope that this helped you in some way. And as always, take care of you.